Hi, 5th graders. Today we are going to be reading chapter 14, almost said 15, 14 of Where the Red Fern Grows. We had previously read 12 and 13, where we met the Pritchards and they did a bet with Billy. And this bet was that Billy could not tree the ghost coon. So Billy took his hounds out with the Pritchard boys, Reuben and Rainey, and was hunting the ghost coon, and he actually ended up treeing it. Once he treed it, he decided that he didn't want to kill the ghost coon. He said it had lived a long life and was very wise, and he thought that it deserved to live. Reuben and Rainey were not exactly happy with this, and they started fighting, Reuben and Billy, and then the Pritchards' hound, Old Blue, showed up and started fighting Old Dan, which then led to Reuben threatening to kill Old Dan and Little Ann, running after them with an axe, tripping, falling on it, and killing himself. So Reuben ended up dying in that chapter, and Billy was pretty broken up about it until he visited Reuben's grave and laid some flowers there. And that was his way of paying respect to Reuben and Rainey and their family. And after that, he felt like he was ready to hunt again. So we're going to pick up after that. Billy is now back into hunting. And we're getting close to the end of the book. Look, we have read all of this, and we only have this left. And I'm pretty sure towards the end there's pages in here that we don't need to read. Yeah. And we're getting to the chapters where I cry. So we'll see how that goes. So let's get going with chapter 14. I'm not exactly sure if this is a long chapter. It's about 17 pages. So it's not too horrible. A few days later, on his way back from the mill, one of the Hatfield boys stopped at our place. He told me my grandfather wanted to see me. It was unusual for Grandpa to send for me, and it had me worried. I figured he wanted to talk to me about the death of Reuben Pritchard. I always enjoyed talking to my grandpa, but I didn't want to talk about Reuben's death. Every time I thought of him, I lived the horrible tragedy all over again. After a practically sleepless night, the next morning I started for the store. I was walking along deep in thought when Little Ann zipped by me. She was as happy as a young gray squirrel. She wiggled and twisted, and once she barked at me. I looked behind me. There was Old Dan trotting along. He stopped when I turned around. Little Ann came up to me. I scolded them and tried to explain that I wasn't hunting. I was just going to the store to see my grandpa what he wanted. They couldn't or didn't want to understand. I picked up a small stick and slapped my leg with it. In a deep voice, I said, "Now, you go home, or I'm going to wear you out." This hurt their feelings. With their tails between their legs and trying side by side, they started back. Every little way they would stop and look back at me. It was too much. I couldn't stand it. I began to feel bad all over. So he told his dogs to go away, and they all got all sad and had that puppy dog look and started walking back. I know if my dog did that, I'd feel bad and be like, "Oh, come on, Will, I'll take you with me." And that's exactly what Billy's going to do. "Well, all right," I said. "Come on, you can go. But, Dan, if there are any dogs around the store and you get in a fight, I won't be hunting for a whole year. And I mean that." Although I knew I didn't. They came running, tickled to death. Little Ann took one of her silly spells. She started nipping on the long red tail of Old Dan. Not getting the reaction from him, she jumped all over him. She barked at him. He wouldn't even look at her. She ran around in front of him and laid down in the trail, acting like a cat ready to spring. Stiff-legged, he walked up close to her, stopped, and showed his teeth. I laughed out loud. I knew he wouldn't bite her any more than he would bite me. He was just acting tough because he was a boy dog. After several attempts to get him to play, Little Ann gave up. Together, they started sniffing around the underbrush. As I walked up in front of the store, Grandpa hollered at me from the barn. I went over to him. Right away, he wanted to know about Reuben's accident. He listened while I told the story over again. After I had my say, Grandpa stood looking down at the ground. There was a deep frown on his face and a hurt look in his eyes. His quietness made me feel uneasy. He finally raised his head and looked at me. What I could see in his friendly old face tore my heart. It seemed that there were more wrinkles than I had ever seen before. His uncombed iron-gray hair looked almost white. I noticed that his wrinkled old hand trembled as he rubbed the wire-stiff stubble on his chin. In a low voice that quivered as he talked, he said, Billy, I'm sorry about all this. Truly sorry. I can't help but feel that it was in some way my fault. No, Grandpa, I said. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. It just happened. And no one could help it. I know, he said. But if I hadn't called Reuben's bet, nothing would have happened. I guess when a man gets old, he doesn't think straight. I shouldn't have let those boys get under my skin. Grandpa, I said, Reuben and Rainey could get under anybody's skin. You couldn't help that. Why, they got under everyone's skin that gets close to them. Yes, I know, he said, but still I acted like a fool. Billy, I had no idea things were going to turn out like they did. I would have never called that bet. So his grandpa's feeling a little bit of guilt, too, because he's the one that really pushed for Billy to go hunting with him. And now he's like, well, if I hadn't pushed, Reuben wouldn't have died. Right now my cat is trying to claw me, so if you see me flinch, that's why. Stop. Wanting the change in conversation, I say, Grandpa, we won the bet fair and square, but they took my money anyway. I saw the fire come back in his eyes. This made me feel better. He was more like the grandpa I loved. That's all right, he said. We'll just forget the whole thing. He stepped over and laid his hand on my shoulder. In a solemn voice, he said, we won't talk about this again. Now, I want you to forget it ever happened because it wasn't your fault. Oh, I know it's hard for a boy to ever completely forget something like that. Although, all through your life, you'll think of it now and then. But try not to let it bother you, and don't ever feel guilty about it. It's not good for a young boy to feel that way. I nodded my head, thinking of people. If people would just stop questioning about Reuben's death, maybe I could forget. Grandpa said, well, the accident wasn't the only thing I wanted to talk to you about. I've got something else. Something I think will help us both forget a lot of things. The twinkle in Grandpa's eyes reminded me of what my father had said. Seems like that old man can cook up more deals than anyone in the country. I didn't care how many deals Grandpa cooked up. He was still the best grandpa in the whole wide world. What have you got? I asked. Come over to the store, he said. I'll show you. On the way over, I heard him mutter, I hope this doesn't turn out like the ghost coon hunt. On entering the store, Grandpa walked to the post office department and came back with a newspaper in his hand. He spread it out on the counter. Pointing his finger in a loud voice, he said, Look there! I looked. There, in black letters, read Championship Coon Hunt to be held. My eyes popped open. Again, I read the words. Grandpa was chuckling. I said, Boy, if that isn't something. A championship coon hunt? Wide-eyed, I asked. Where are they having this hunt? And what does it have to do with us? Grandpa was getting excited. Off came his glasses, and out came his old red handkerchief. He blew his breath on his lens and polished them. He snorted a time or two, reared back, and almost shouted, Do with us? Why, it has everything to do with us. All my life I've wanted to go to one of these big coon hunts. Why, I've even dreamed about it. And now the opportunity has come. Yes, sir, now I can go. He paused. That is, if it's all right with you. Oliver. I was dumbfounded. I said, All right with me? Why, Grandpa, you know it's all right with me, but what have I got to do with this? Grandpa was so excited I thought he was going to burst a blood vessel. Talking excitedly, he said, I've got it all fixed, Billy. We can enter Old Dan and Little Ann in the championship hunt. I was so surprised at what Grandpa had said, I couldn't utter a word. At first, I was scared, and then a wonderful feeling came over me. I felt the excitement of a big hunt as it burned its way into my body. I started breathing like I had been running for 100 miles. After several attempts, I croaked, Can just any dog be in this hunt? Grandpa almost jumped as he answered, No, sir, not just any hound can be entered. They have to be the best, and they have to be registered, too. He started talking with his hand, pointing to a chair. He said, Sit down and I'll tell you about it. Grandpa calmed down a bit and started talking in a serious voice. Billy, he said, it takes some doing to have a set of dogs entered in this hunt. I've been working on this for months. I've written letters on top of letters. I've even asked several of my good friends in town to help me. You see, I've kept a record of all the coons your dogs have caught, and believe me, their catch is up there with the best of them. Now, I've already paid the entry fee, and everything is fixed. All we have to do is go. Entry fee? How much did it cost? You let me worry about that, he said. Now, what do you say? Want to give it a whirl? I understand the winner receives a gold cup, and you can never tell. You might come home with it. We have a good chance as anyone else. Grandpa had me so worked up by this time, I didn't think anyone else had any good hounds but me. After I reared back and blurted, "It's all right with me, Grandpa. Just tell me what to do." Grandpa flew out of gear like a Model T Ford. He slapped the counter with his hand. In a pent-up voice he said, "That's the boy! That's the way I like to hear a coon hunter talk." With a questioning look on his face, he asked, "Didn't I see your dogs with you when you came in?" "Yeah, they followed me," I said. "They're outside." "Well, call them in," he said. "I've got something for them." I called to them. Little Ann came in the store, walking like she was scared. Old Dan came in the door and stopped. I tried to coax him in. It was no use. My dogs, never being allowed in the house, were scared to come in. Grandpa walked over to a hoop of cheese and cut off 2 chunks the size of my fist. He walked to the door, talking to old Dan. "What's the matter, boy?" he said. "You scared to come in? Well, that shows you're a good dog." He handed him a piece of cheese. I heard it rattle in his throat as he gulped it down. Grandpa came back and set little Ann up on the counter. He chuckled as he broke the cheese into smaller pieces and fed her. "Yes, sir," he said. "I think we have the best coon hounds in these Ozark Mountains, and just as sure as shooting, we're going to win that gold cup." Grandpa didn't have to say that. That was the way I was feeling. I already had the cup. All I had to do was go and get it. Finished with his feeding of little Ann, Grandpa said, "Now, let's see. The hunt starts on the 23rd. That's about, well, let's see, it's the 17th. Counting on his fingers, he figured out. "That's 6 days from now," he said in a jubilant voice. Jubilant means excited. I nodded my head. "We can leave here early in the morning on the 22nd, he said, "and barring accidents, we should make it to the campground in plenty of time for the grand opening." I asked how we were going. "We'll go in my buggy," he said. "I'll load the tent and everything the night before." I asked him what he wanted me to bring. "Nothing," he said, "but these 2 little hounds, and you be here early. And I believe I'll let these dogs rest, 'cause we want them in tip-top shape when we get there." I saw the thinking wrinkles bunch up in Grandpa's forehead. "You reckon your daddy would like to go?" he asked. "As late in the fall as it is, I don't think he's too busy, is he?" "No, our crops are all gathered," I said. "We've been clearing some of the bottom land, but that's almost done now." "Well, ask him," he said. "Tell him I'd like to have him go." "I'll ask him," I said. "But you know how Papa is. The farm comes first with him." "I know," Grandpa said, "but you ask him anyway and tell him what I said. Now, it's getting late and you better get heading home." I was almost at the door when Grandpa said, "Wait a minute." He walked behind the candy counter and shook out one of the quarter sacks. He filled it to the brim, bounced on the counter a few times, and dropped in a few more gumdrops. With a twinkle in his eyes and a smile on his face, he handed it to me and saying, "Save some for your sisters." I was so choked up I couldn't say anything. I took it and flew out the door calling to my dogs. On my way home, I didn't walk to the ground. I was way up in the clouds just skipping along. With a song, I told the sycamore trees and the pop-eyed gray squirrels how happy I was. Little Ann sensed my happiness. She pranced along on the trail. With a doggish grin on her face, she begged for a piece of candy, which I gladly gave her. Even old Dan felt the pleasant atmosphere. His long red tail fanned the air. Once he raised his head and bawled. I stood still and listened to the droning tones of his deep voice. The sound seemed to be trapped for an instant in the thick timber. It rolled around under the tall white sycamores, beat its way through the wild cane, and found freedom out over the blue clear waters of the river. The sound, following the river's course, rolled to the beat of the jungle. I looked at old Dan. He was standing perfectly still, and with his right foot raised and his long ears fanned out, he seemed to be listening, challenging any living creature to make a noise. The silence was broken by the whee of a red-tailed hawk. This seemed to be a signal. All around me the happy atmosphere resumed its natural state. I heard the bam, bam, bam of a woodpecker high in the top of a box elder snag. The cry of a king's fisher and the scream of a blue jay blended perfectly in the drum-like beat. A barking red squirrel glued to the side of the hackberry tree kept time with the music, with the beat of its tail. Each noise I heard, each sight I saw was very familiar to me, but I never grew tired of listening and watching. They were a God-sent gift, and I enjoyed them all. As I skipped along, it was hard for me to realize a wonderful thing that had happened in such a few short years. I had 2 of the finest little hounds that had ever bawled on the trail of a ringtail coon. I had a wonderful mother and father and 3 little sisters. I had the best grandpa a boy ever had, and to top it all off, I was going on a championship coon hunt. It was no wonder that my heart was bursting with happiness. Wasn't I the luckiest boy in the world? Everyone was just sitting down for supper when I got home. The oldest one asked if I wanted any of the candy. No, I said. I brought it all for you, of course. I didn't tell them I had 4 pieces in my pocket. They thanked me with their clear blue eyes. I guessed it was pretty hard for a young boy to fool his mama. She took one look at me and called me over. She ruffled my hair, kissed me, and said, "If my little boy's eyes get any bigger, they're going to pop right out of his head. Now tell me, what are you so happy about?" Before I could say anything, Papa chuckled and asked, "What's going on between you and your grandpa? What are you and that old man cooking up now?" As fast as I could talk, I started telling them about the big coon hunt. I told them how Grandpa was working to get the dogs entered and how he'd already paid my entry fee. Catching my breath and looking at Papa, I said, "We're going in his buggy, and he wants you to go." I waited in silence for his reply. Papa sat there, staring off into space, sipping his coffee, saying nothing. I knew he was thinking. In the silence, I was sure I could hear my heart thumping. I said, "Papa, please go. We'll have a lot of fun. Besides, the winner receives a big golden cup." He scratched his head and said, "Billy, I'd sure like to go, but I don't see how I can with all this work around here." I was beginning to think that Papa wasn't going to go. Then Mama started talking. "Work?" she said. "Why, all the work is practically done. I don't know of one thing you couldn't put off for a few days. Why don't you go? You haven't been anywhere since I don't know when." "It's not only the work I'm thinking of," Papa said. "It's you and the girls." "Why, don't worry about the girls and me," Mama said. "We'll be all right. Besides, it's several months before I need any help." Mama said this, it dawned on me. I had been so busy with my coon hunting, I hadn't noticed anything unusual. Mama's tummy was all swelled up. She was going to have a baby. I felt guilty for not having noticed. I went over and put my arms around her and kissed her. Papa spoke up. "It's sure going to be a big hunt," he said. "I heard something about it up at the store one day." "Grandpa said there would be hunters there from everywhere," I said, and some of the best coon hounds in the country." "Do you think you have a chance to win the cup?" Papa asked. I started to answer him when the little one piped up. "They can't beat Old Dan and Little Lamb," she said. "I just bet they can't." Everyone laughed at her serious remark. I would have kissed her, but she had candy, cornbread, and molasses all over her face. I told Papa I didn't know how good these dogs were, but that there was one thing I did know. If they beat mine, they would have to hunt harder than they had ever hunted before. After I had my say about my dogs, a silence settled in. I saw a pleased smile spread over Papa's face. He stood up and said, "All right, I'll go, and by golly, we'll bring that gold cup back too." My sister started clapping with her hands and squealing with delight. A satisfied smile spread over my mother's face. In the midst of all this excitement, my little sister, saying not a word, climbed out of her chair. No one said anything. We just watched her. Still clutching a spoon in her small hand, she came around to the table and walked up to me. Looking down the floor in a bashful voice, she said, "Can I have the gold cup?" Putting my finger on her sticky little chin, and I said, "Honey, if I win it, I'll give it to no one but you." I had to cross my heart and hope to die several times before she was satisfied. Back in her chair, she said, "You just wait and see. It'll be mine, nobody's but mine, and I'll put my Banty eggs in it." "Silly, you don't put Banty eggs in a gold cup," the oldest one said. "They're just made to look at." That night, I dreamed of the gold cups. The next few days were busy for me. Knowing that Papa and I would be gone for several days, I did everything I could to make things convenient for Mom. I chopped up a large pile of wood, stacked it close to the kitchen. To make it easy for her to feed the stock, I cut some poles from the hillside and boxed up in the stalls in the barn. I filled in some of the hay so she wouldn't have to climb the ladder to the loft. Papa laid down the law to my sisters about being good and helping Mama while we were gone. The day before we were to leave, I was nervous as a June bug in a henhouse. The day seemed endless. A few of my miserable hours were spent talking to my dogs. I told them all about the big hunt and how important it was. "Now, if you don't win the golden cup," I said, "I won't be mad because you will do your best." I dreaded to go to bed that night. I thought sleep would be impossible. I must be more tired than I thought I was. I fell asleep almost immediately. Old Red, our rooster, woke me at daybreak, crowing his fool head off. It was a beautiful morning, clear and frosty. At breakfast, Mama kissed goodbye and started the stove. "You'll have to grow a little." Walking to the side of my father, I threw out my chest and tried hard to keep pace with his long strides. He noticed and laughed. "You'll have to grow a little bit," he said, "before you can take steps that long." I didn't say anything. I just smiled. Hearing a noise overhead, I looked up. The gray ones were winging their way southward. I listened to their talking and wondered what they were saying. Looking to the mountains around us, I saw the mysterious artist who comes at night had paid a visit. I wondered how he could paint so many different colors in one night: red, wine, yellow, and rust. My dogs were trotting in front of me. As I smiled at their hind quarters shifted to the right, little Anne would jump and bounce to try and get old Dan to play. But the solemn old boy just jogged ahead. You know, Papa said, she doesn't even act like a hound. She's bouncing and playing all the time. Why, she acts more like a little pup than a hound. Yeah, I know, I said. I've noticed that myself. But you know one thing, Papa? She's the smartest dog I've ever seen. Why, some of the things she does are almost unbelievable. Yes, I know, said Papa, but still, it's strange. Very strange. There's only one thing wrong with her, Papa, I said. Yeah, what's that, he said. You won't believe it, I said, but she's gun-shy. Gun-shy? How do you know she's gun-shy? Papa asked. I didn't know for a long time, I said, until one day when I was hoeing corn down in the field by the old slough. She and old Dan were digging in a bank after a groundhog. Across the river, some fishermen started shooting a gun. It scared little Anne, and she came running to me, shaking all over. Ah, Papa said, maybe you just thought she was scared. No, I didn't, Papa, I said. It happened again up at the store one day. Grandpa shot a chicken hawk. When the gun went off, it scared her half to death. No, she's gun-shy, all right. Ah, well, Papa said. That doesn't mean anything. A lot of dogs are afraid of guns. I know, I said. But you wouldn't think she would be that way. I believe if I had a gun of my own, I would break her of being gun-shy. Papa looked at me. He said, from what your mother says, you won't be getting a gun for some time yet. Yes, I know, I said. When we reached the store, we saw the team was already hitched in the buggy and standing in the front of the store. Grandpa had loaded the tent and several boxes of groceries. I had never seen him in such high spirits. He slapped Papa on the back, saying, I'm sure glad you could go with us. It'll be good to get out once in a while. Papa laughed. It looked like I had to go or have everyone in the family mad at me. Looking at the buggy, I saw my axe. I didn't think I ever wanted to see it again, but for some reason it didn't look like I thought it would. There was no blood on it, and it looked harmless enough laying there all clean and bright. Grandpa saw my eyes looking at it. He came over. I kept it a few days, he said, just in case the marshal wanted to ask some questions. Everything seems to be all right now, and we may need a good axe on this hunt. Grandpa sensed how I felt about the axe. He waited in silence for my answer. The excitement of the hunt was so strong in me, even the sight of my axe brought back only a fleeting remembrance of Reuben's accident. I said, yes, we will need one. Besides, it's a good one, and there's no use in throwing it away. Grandpa laughed, reaching over and screwed my cap around my head, saying, That the boy! That's what I wanted you to say. Now, you better go to the barn and get some hay and make a bed in the buggy box for your dogs. Ah, Grandpa, I said, they can walk. They don't ever get tired. Besides, they're used to walking. Walk! Grandpa almost shouted. They're not going to walk. No, sir, not if I can help it. You want them to be footsore by the time we get there? Papa chuckled and said, we can't win a gold cup with two footsore hounds, can we? Of course not, Grandpa said. Now, you go and get a hay like I said. As I turned to the barn, I couldn't help but smile. It made me feel good to have my Papa and Grandpa so concerned about my dogs. I had taken a few steps when Grandpa said, Oh, wait a minute. I stopped and turned. Walking up to me, glancing toward the house, he said, In that empty crop barrel in the harness room, there's a jug of corn liquor. Cover it up with the hay so your grandma won't see it, and bring it out with you. With a twinkle in his eyes, he said, You never can tell when we'll need some medicine. I knew my father wouldn't drink any of the liquor, but if Grandpa wanted to take along a whole barrel, it was all right with me. Just when I thought we were ready to leave, Grandma came busting out. Grandpa got nervous. He whispered and said, Did you hide the jug good? I nodded my head. Grandma handed Grandpa a pair of long-handled underwear and a scarf, saying, I knew you'd forgot something. Grandpa snorted, but knew there was no arguing with her. She started picking up the groceries, asking about salt and pepper and matches. Nanny, we've got everything, he said. You must think I'm a baby and don't know how to pack a grub box. A baby, Grandma snorted. Why, you're worse than a baby. At least they have a little sense. You don't have any at all. An old codger like you out chasing a coon all over the hills. After her biting remark, I thought Grandpa was going to blow up. He snorted like Daisy, our milk cow, when she had seen a booger. I crawled up in the buggy box with my dogs and hung my feet out. Grandma came over and asked me about warm clothes. I told her I had plenty. She kissed me goodbye, and we were on our way. So that's chapter 14. Grandpa enters Billy's 2 hounds in a coon hunting championship hunt. That was a lot of words. A championship hunt, and Billy is beyond excited. He didn't believe that his dogs could do it, but Grandpa got them registered, and they are going to be doing the coon hunt. So in the next chapter or 2, I don't know how many chapters are focused. I can't remember how many chapters are focused on the championship hunt. We're going to hear about that and kind of see if Billy wins. And it does get a little intense in these chapters again too, so there's kind of some more action and adventure, which I know is the interesting parts for some of you. I hope you're enjoying the book, and let me know if you have any questions. Bye!